History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Mirta Ojito, author of Deeper Than the Ocean. Hi, Mirta.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, I run a press called History Through Fiction, and I am very fascinated by history, so that's where I want to start. Tell us about the shipwreck that inspired this novel.
Yes, the first thing I want to tell you is that I did not know anything about the shipwreck. It's not like I've had this knowledge since I was a kid. I did not. I found a book in 2006 titled The Mystery of the Valbanera. The book was in Spanish, and I found it in Key West. And it told the story of a ship that left Spain in 1919 carrying 1,200 people between passengers and crew. And it was scheduled to make 3 stops in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Santiago de Cuba on the island of Cuba, and then in Havana, the capital of Cuba. And it did make the first 2 stops. The ship, I should say, was carrying mostly immigrants, people who were coming to the Americas to have a better life. They were escaping poverty, many of them. And on the way to Havana, a hurricane developed. It was really a devastating hurricane that caused a lot of damage to Havana, Key West, and even Texas. And the ship didn't make it. It was lost. It was lost for days. It was on the front page of the New York Times, the Miami Herald, Times-Picayune. AP carried the story. It was a big deal at the time because it was a mystery. Where did the ship go? Eventually, it was found deeper than the ocean, and therefore the title of the book, off the coast of Key West. And at that time, we know because of the records, it was carrying 488 people, of which about 400 were passengers. And when divers went down, they were surprised to find no bodies. Were not able to locate any of the bodies. And they also, to their surprise, they hadn't even made an attempt to escape. They saw that the rafts were still tied to the ship, so they didn't have time. And when I read this book, I was surprised. I was like, how come? I thought I knew a lot about immigration and Cuba and Spain. I have been covering immigration as a journalist for almost 40 years, and I had never heard of this poor man's Titanic, because that's what it was. This was the forgotten Titanic of people that, quote unquote, no consequence to history. And so they had been forgotten. And I was just taken by that, and I could not get it out of my head.
Yeah, I did a little reading in preparation for the interview about the Valbanera, and I was really interested in the fact that they is this right that they were going to port, but the waters were too choppy or something like that, and then they had to wait
Yes,
out the storm? And is
that's
that
what happens.
okay? And I mean, is that typical that a ship will have to go further out to sea and just kind of wait things out?
It must have been, at least at the time. I don't know enough about ships
Hmm.
and weather patterns to know that, but I think possibly, yes. And definitely at the time. And remember, it wasn't like they could communicate. They couldn't call. It was Morse code.
Hmm.
So that's how they told them, wait it out. Don't come into the port, or don't come into the bay. It's a very beautiful bay, the Bay of Havana. Wait it out. And something must have happened. Some people say the captain wasn't experienced enough, but that's not really true. The captain was experienced. He was young and he was new to that ship, but he had some experience. So I think it was just an unfortunate accident, a weather accident.
Okay, so you were inspired by this book, but I also heard in a previous interview that you were inspired by a vision you had. Can you tell
I
us about that?
did, which was incredible because I had, this is my first novel, and I've written 2 books, previous books that are nonfiction, very much nonfiction, that have required a lot of research. So I wasn't used to sort of the magic of fiction and how things work. when you're making things up. But when I read this book, I remember closing the book and looking out to the sea. I was in Key West, and I had this vision of a woman in a like lilac dress running through a ship with no shoes on and long flowing red hair, curly hair, desperately looking for her daughter, her infant daughter. And I thought, do you know who is this woman? And I really, really wanted to tell her story. And from the beginning, I gave her my maternal grandmother's name. She was always Catalina Quintana, which is, in fact, my grandmother's name, who passed away young. She died when she was 40, the day after my mother turned 16. So I never knew her, but she was very much a presence in our lives. My mom talked about her all the time. And I've always liked the name. I always thought, if I have a daughter, I will name her Catalina. But I ended up having three boys, so I couldn't use the name. And when I had this vision, I thought, that's it. That's my Catalina.
That's great. It sounds like a lot of things in your life kind of come together for this novel because
Yes,
you have Catalina who's immigrating from the Canary Islands, and then you
yes,
have Mara, a journalist, much like yourself.
yes,
So tell us
yes.
about both, kind of how your life lends to the story and also about these characters, Catalina and Mara, and how the dual timeline works.
Yes. So there are two protagonists in the book. One is Catalina Quintana, who was born with at the beginning of the 20th century in 1900. And she's in the Canary Islands, which is an archipelago of islands off the coast of Africa, part of Spain. And she is in one of those islands, a very small one, a very beautiful and charming island called La Palma. And she's the daughter of silkworm farmers who falls in love with the wrong boy. And her parents want to send her away to marry her to somebody else and send her to Cuba to separate her from this boy. At the time, there was a lot of migration between Spain and the Americas. And I say the Americas on purpose because it wasn't just to the Caribbean, Cuba, Puerto Rico, but also to Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, Texas, New Orleans. So the idea of Spaniards coming to the New World was very much a thing of those years. In fact, between 1820 and 1930, 4.5 Spaniards came to the Americas, which doesn't seem like a big number now, but given the world population then and the population of Spain, it was a very, very large migration. And so that's her story. And then 100 years later, the story is told in alternating voices, 100 years apart. And 100 years later, the character is Mara Dennis, who is named Mara because mar is the word for sea in Spanish. And her mother was very afraid of the sea, as it is. Mara is also very afraid of the sea. And her mother thought, you have to name your fears so you can conquer them. So she named her Mara. And Mara is a 55-year-old journalist. And I gave her a lot of my own story, but I'm not her. People who've read it are looking for clues to see how much of it my story is in Mara. I gave her my profession. She's a journalist. I gave her motherhood. I have three sons. She has one. I gave her my back pains. I have back pains. And I gave her my fear of the ocean. But other than that, she is her own character, and she's a freelance journalist in the north of Spain. And one day she gets the call from her editor in a very important paper in New York, which, of course, I don't say it's the New York Times, but it is. It's where I used to work. And I just had to imagine that in my head for it to happen. And she gets a call from her editor saying there is the migrants are coming to the Canary Islands, and we think it's going to be a crisis, as they've already had in 2015, because if you get to the Canary Islands, you are, for all intents and purposes, in Spain and therefore in Europe because it's part of the European Union. So they have had an issue with migrants in boats from Africa to the islands. They're only 63 miles apart, much like we've had here in Miami with rafters coming from Cuba and Haiti. And so she's sent to that assignment. And before she gets there, her mom calls. Her mom calls her every day from Miami. And her mother says, well, since you're going, can you please get my grandmother's birth certificate? Because I want to become a Spanish citizen. Until very recently, until about 3 weeks ago, Spain had this law that just expired, which allowed the children and grandchildren and even great grandchildren of Spanish citizens to claim their Spanish citizenship if they have papers to prove it, like birth certificates of the entire family. And so, armed with this dual assignment from her editor and her mom, she sets off in this adventure to the Canary Islands, which has never been, and in the process uncovers this secret that's really haunted the family for generations. And that changes everything she knew about herself and about her family. So I have to tell you, it was a lot of fun writing this book because my character does what I wish I had done. I wish I had searched for my relatives that I have since found out at least two of them also come from the islands. I did not know this when I started working on the book. And now, so I'm in a case of real life imitating art because now I want to do what Mara did. Let's see how far I get.
So you are working on that.
I am. I have two names already. I already
Hmm.
know my paternal maternal great grandfather. His name was Antonio Quintana, the father of Catalina Quintana in real life. He was born on the islands. I don't know which one though, which makes it really hard getting his birth certificate. And I recently found out, I don't know how I didn't know, but I did not know that the mother of my paternal grandmother, her name was Clara Cruz, also comes from the islands. So I have the island on both sides, from my father and from my mother. And I am almost embarrassed to say I didn't know that.
Hmm. That's amazing. I wonder if your novel might inspire others to do the same. I know there's so much
Some
we
people have
can.
already told me that.
Yeah,
Some people have told me that they're searching, which is wonderful.
yeah. Well, you did a wonderful job of describing how these stories connect, but I'm curious, as a journalist, did you find yourself constrained at first, like telling the story? You said you really enjoyed writing this novel. Were there any constraints where you're like, oh, geez, I don't know if I can fictionalize this. This kind of goes against journalistic guidelines. Anything like that that came up for you?
Well, it wasn't a constraint. It was just the fact that I wasn't going to change anything about the ship. I mean, what happened to the ship was a tragedy, and I couldn't change that. Um, I perhaps, I know some people wanted me to, but I would not change that. I wouldn't dare to because that's the history that I wanted to honor. Everything else was fair game because it was a product of my imagination braided with my mother's stories about her upbringing and her own mother and my own experience growing up in Cuba and later in Miami and living for so many years as a journalist. And also my experiences in Spain. I've spent a lot of time in Spain, although never in the Canary Islands until January of this year. The book was written and sold and already in the editing process when I said, finally, I have to go to make sure that everything I imagined is actually true. I don't know why I didn't go before, but I'm very superstitious, just like my character. And I thought, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to jinx it. I'm going to first write it and then see what happens. Because I didn't want the reality to change what I had in my mind. Um, so I did do a lot of research before I went and before I wrote the book and while writing the book. but I'd never been until January of this year. And it was fantastic to see that many of the things I had researched and imagined and written about were in fact the way I had imagined. Others were not. So I had to change that a little bit. But there was time. There was time.
Well, I would definitely love to go sometime. I did spend some time in Andalusia. I actually did
Beautiful.
a program called Workaway. You work for a family and they provide you room and board. And actually, the aunt Marta was from the Canary Islands and she came to visit us. I've always thought about visiting ever since then, so I'll have to go sometime.
Oh, they're really like they're called mysterious islands, and I can see why. There's something, especially La Palma, which is where I really spent. I went to Tenerife as well, but I spent more time in La Palma. It's like another world. Just really beautiful, volcanic, and lots of trees, very green at the same time, volcanic, and it has all kinds of things going on at the same time. So it's a little jarring, and the peaks are really, really high, and it was just an amazing experience.
This is kind of just for my own selfish interest. I'm curious about working with editors for this narrative because obviously you worked with editors in a newsroom. What was the difference in working with an editor for a novel? Were you kind of surprised when you got your edits back, or can you kind of describe the differences in process between the two?
Well, I remember I've already written two nonfiction books, so I cannot really compare it to journalism, but I can compare it to the nonfiction work, and there really isn't that much of a difference. Editors know when scenes work and when they don't, and in nonfiction, you have to be conscious of the reader and write it, even if it's true, all true, but you have to use the tools of novelists to give you soul to your book, if you will. So I'm already used to that kind of editing, and it went really, really smoothly. It was fantastic. My editor was Claire Wachtel.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about your own experience as an immigrant to the US and how you used that to tell the story of Catalina in this novel.
Yes. So I came from Cuba when I was 16 in a boat lift called the Mariel boat lift. And that was a time in 1980 when more than 125,000 people took to the sea in different kinds of boats that left from the United States to pick us up and came to Key West. We arrived in Key West. So Key West has always had a huge significance for me. And when I arrived, I did not speak a word of English, and I wasn't particularly thrilled at first to be here because, of course, I was a teenager and I had friends and I had my life in Cuba. It was weird because I always knew that we were leaving the country. And particularly at the end, I told my father that I wanted to leave, which is the reason why we finally did it. And yet, when I arrived, I felt so unseen, so uncomfortable, missed my friends so much that I very badly wanted to go back. So it took me a while to adjust, and now for a long time now, I have been very happy that my father made that decision and that we arrived here. But absolutely, it isn't just because of my own experience, but I've covered immigration both for the Miami Herald and the New York Times for many, many years. And my nonfiction books have to do with immigration. One is the story of the boat lift. It's a reported memoir of how I happened to come to the US. That's Finding Mañana, a memoir of the Cuban exodus. And my second book, Hunting Season, Immigration and Murder in an All-American Town. It's about an undocumented immigrant on Long Island who was killed by a group of teenagers whose weekend entertainment was to harass immigrants. So both books have to do with immigration. And all of my experiences and my work and my job and everything that I've done went into this book.
Can you talk more about, well, obviously this is relevant for today, and you've done so much work on immigration, and you're a celebrated journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner. Um, how do you think a novel like this can contribute to the discussion? Because obviously, yes, it's highlighted in the news right now, but it's almost never not immigration policy. And you even mentioned um, immigration to the Catalina Islands, or not Catalina Islands, Canary
Mm.
Islands. So it's an issue of discussion, that a contentious issue. Can you talk about how your work, both with this novel and over the decades now, kind of contributes to that discussion, and where you think readers can, what they can take away from reading your story and contributing to that discussion?
Yes, I knew a professor when I was teaching at Columbia University. I knew a professor, Jose Moya, an immigrant himself from Cuba, who taught immigration courses. He's a historian. And I always invited him to my class for the first lecture. And he said many interesting things, but I remember this one in particular. Immigration is older than the word. In other words, before humans could speak, they were already on the move. We were on the move for food, shelter, protection, safety, all kinds of things. And frankly, that hasn't changed. Now we call that political reasons or economic reasons, but it's always food, shelter, security, protection, be it religions or be it political persecution. That's what people are always fleeing. And I think, when I wrote the book, I wasn't thinking about the larger contribution that it would make. Basically, I just wanted to rescue the story of the Valbanera from history. But if it contributes to a better understanding of the push and pull reasons for migrating, if it contributes to a better understanding of who immigrants have been and continue to be, and it also, if it sparks the curiosity to learn more about the islands and about Cubans, um, and even about journalism, I think that would be terrific. But mostly, I want people to be enthralled by the words and the pages, and to then walk away feeling that they read something that they loved and that they also learned something about it.
Well, I think that's fantastic. We all get so enamored with the moment, but you give us a chance to kind of step back and see it as a whole, and also to be immersed in it, and really take an emotional response that's meaningful.
And the other thing, Colin, is that history is never that far away, or in this case, even physically far. The Valvanera is still in the same place, 43 miles of Key West and 25 feet deep. Recently, I told a reporter I know, and he's a diver, and he said, "Can anybody go?" And I said, "I guess so." So he went to down there. It was almost to the day 106 years after the shipwreck. And the footage is fantastic. I have it. He sent me pictures, he sent me a video. There's very little left, but still there, a reminder that even years and our own lack of memory cannot possibly destroy history. There it is. You can touch it, you can swim through it. I haven't done it. I'm afraid of the sea, as I said. But this reporter did, and I'm very grateful because I was very emotional when he sent me the video of himself diving through the ship. It's just like I had imagined it. Um, but history is tangible. It's a thing that is right there for all of us to read about, to be informed, or even to experience in a physical way.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what are you working on now? Are you at liberty to talk about your next project?
I am working on something, but I am, as I said, I'm very superstitious, so I want to, I don't want to say anything about it.
Okay.
But I am working. I have about 10,000 words of my next book. Hopefully, we'll be able to finish it next year.
Well, Mirta, congratulations on Deeper Than the Ocean. It's an honor to talk to you, and it's just such a wonderful novel. Thanks so much for talking with me about it.
Thank you, Colin. I have to tell you, I love your show. I listen to it all the time. So I'm super, super thrilled to be here and to finally see you, not just a voice. So thank you.
Of course.